It's homecoming season at HBCUs, when generations of alumni come together to celebrate Black culture and community. State Farm honors the strength of those communities and legacy, pride, and unstoppable energy of the HBCU family. That's why State Farm agents are committed to helping you choose the coverage you need so you can protect the things that matter most. And that's something to celebrate too. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. And I'm delighted to be joined today by author Mark Batey, who has written a trilogy of key Victorian figures, the kinds of Victorian figures that perhaps don't get the press that they deserve. The trilogy has been kind of published sequentially over the last few years, and it is a kind of a narrative journey into the lives of Victorian individuals. Grace Darling, Josephine Butler, whom some of you may probably be a bit more familiar with, and we've talked about Josephine on the podcast previously, and George Biddell Airy. And I'm not going to give a précis of any of them because that's sort of not the role of the host, so to speak. But firstly, welcome, Mark. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you very much for having me, Nick. It's lovely to be here.
Okay, super. Fantastic. Okay, so firstly, let's just give an overview of the three figures that you've written about, and then maybe we can explore a bit about where your interest in them came from.
So I started with Grace Darling, who I'm from the northeast myself. I'm speaking to you from my home at a town called Amble, which is on the beautiful Northumberland coast, a few miles from where Grace was born and died, in fact, in the beautiful little town of Bamborough. Which is just further north of here. So I started with Grace, who is still, I think, on the primary school curriculum here. Teachers in your audience will probably know of Grace and her exploits. She was the lighthouse keeper's daughter who, with her father, achieved an amazing sea rescue of the survivors of a shipwreck on the Farne Islands. And then went on to struggle with the fame and the notoriety that amazing sea rescue brought upon her shoulders. Arguably, she was sort of the first media celebrity at a time when there was nothing other than newspapers, but there were many newspapers and they were growing in circulation very, very quickly in the mid-19th century, as you know. Yeah. And Grace struggled with the fame that brought her, and she ended up, she died of tuberculosis, but I think she was in a really sort of weakened, fragile, vulnerable state because of the pressures of fame heaped upon her, and that's something we see today. I mean, we see sort of so-called media celebrities struggling with exactly those issues today. And the tragedy of Grace was that she died at 26 years of age.
Well, fame itself is this kind of product of that era, this era of the beginnings of mass communication, mass publishing, the telegraph, and other kinds of things. And sort of later on, when the kind of the Harmsworth family create things like the Daily Mail, there sort of towards the end of the century, beginning of the 20th century, the thing that they wanted more than anything else was to sell the human interest story, and that is really the kind of the birth of the tabloid story. And it's about and obviously everything that's ever happened since in that particular history has led to people being squashed along the way.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened to Grace, Nick, and it's very much a Victorian story, I think, in the sense that purity was this huge sort of virtue, particularly among women at the time. This touches on something you mentioned right at the top about how people are perceived and how society at the time treated people. And purity, simplicity, honesty, a self-effacing nature, all of these were top virtues in women. And Grace was perceived to have these virtues by writers and correspondents at the time, because she was modest. She wasn't interested in self-glorification in any way. She wasn't interested at all in all of the merchandise that exploited her image, which again is something we're familiar with now. Licensing and merchandising are huge businesses. At the time it was non-existent, and it just sort of happened around her that her face was on shortbread tins and so on at the time. She could not have been less interested in that, was embarrassed by it, and her modesty was regarded as she was an absolute, or perceived as, portrayed as an absolute paragon of virtue. And it was this very modesty, I think, that contributed in a way to her downfall, because it only added to the pressure on her and the media interest in her. Today she would have been door-stopped and her social media have gone berserk and all the rest of it. At the time, you did have journalists turning up literally by the boatload, by the cobble load, on the island where her family worked, and her father would try and shoo them away, and this was the life that she ended up living in her later years.
And now, the news cycle would be done with her in 48 hours. But then this went on for years and years, did it?
It did. It took a little while for it to get going. It was fairly quick, but it took a little, by which I mean a few days after the rescue, for the loss of life, and for the fact that there were, I think it was 9 survivors were brought back to shore. So that took a few days to get out, but then it was at the inquest on who was to blame for all of this. Was it the shipping company? Was it the captain? Who was it who caused all of this? There was an I think 2 inquests they had to go through, and it was there that the fact that this lighthouse keeper's daughter had gone out in the cobble in these stormy seas and rescued, or helped to rescue, the survivors. That was where it came out, and that was where the press got hold of it at the inquest. And the fame literally grew almost by the day from there, and it did last. As you say, it lasted. I think she had 4 more years of life after the rescue, which was 1838. She died in 1842, didn't she? So she had 4 more years of life, and it never left her alone in that period.
Right. And you're in an age in the mid 19th century of kind of an age of epidemics, an age of tuberculosis and cholera, and you have people who in the prime of their life just cut down by these terrible illnesses, and so kind of in a way, her dying at a young age is sort of a piece with mortality at the time, but still kind of tragic in a way, in that the last few years of her life were this torment produced.
Yeah, they were. They absolutely were. I mean, it was a very miserable time for her. And as you I mean, you're absolutely right. At the time, of course, there was nothing particularly unusual about infant mortality. She survived through that, obviously, and as you say, caught one of the epidemics that were one of the contagious diseases that were just rife at the time, and from our point of view now, today, 200 years on, it is tragic. I mean, Grace literally passed away in her father's arms in a little cottage in Bamborough. That was how she passed away. I mean, the other two subjects that in the little trilogy, Josephine Butler and George Airy, both lived on to grand old age. I mean, what we would, I think George or Josephine was in her late 70s. I think George reached 90, 91, right, which even, now is a grand old age. But Grace didn't get beyond her mid-20s.
So let's now talk a bit about Josephine Butler. So again, we spoke about Josephine Butler on the podcast when we were talking a while back. I think we had Christopher Brookmeyer on, and the Josephine Butler's a kind of a hugely well known and well explored figure in the wider suffrage movement. And the wider movement for kind of female emancipation in the 19th century. But tell us about your understanding of her. What sort of a character was she?
Yeah, my take on her is that she was inspired by because she came from out of the three. I mean, Grace and George Airy really started from absolutely nothing. I think Josephine was from a slightly higher sort of social standing than the other two. Obviously, she was related to the prime minister at the time, because she was maiden name obviously was Josephine Gray. But my take on her was that she was really inspired to do what she did by the appalling loss of one of her daughters, that she just couldn't get over. Eva fell down or fell off the banister. She was sliding down banisters at home, and she fell off, just tipped over, lost her balance, fell off the banister and smashed down into the hallway, which had stone flags on the floor. And that was the end of Eva in this sort of appalling accident. And Josephine and her husband, I think, struggled to cope with that. And I think after that, I mean, obviously that would affect anybody, very seriously. And I think after that, Josephine was looking, how on earth do I make sense of the dreadful loss of a little daughter? And obviously there were all sorts of I mean, she could have gone on to campaign for children, because God knows there were enough issues at the time, and factories and all the rest of it. She didn't do that. She decided to focus on still on young women, but older, so teens and older women who were basically working as prostitutes at the time, which of whom there were many thousands in every city. I think Josephine probably saw it as a way of sort of economic emancipation for women. It was a way it was a way to earn money and perhaps to break out of a position of dreadful poverty at home. That is not, of course, how it was perceived.
No.
More broadly, of course, the church, said prostitutes are the lowest of the low, and all the rest of it. And Josephine's focus was on, as you'll know, of course, was on the repeal of the series of Contagious Diseases Acts. That was really what her life's work became all about, I think. And for me, that is what the story was. That's the story in my version of Josephine's life, that she formed the Ladies National Association and was her vehicle and so on, and did absolutely everything that she needed to do, would never take no for an answer. And at a time when, again, going back to the point you make about the framework of society at the time, when housewives were literally housewives, they were seen and not heard at home. Josephine was the opposite of all of that. And I just came to admire her courage and determination and resolve enormously. Just extraordinary.
I think, of course, at the time, having the time, the connections, and the resources to do any of these sorts of things does really depend on whether you are kind of a society lady or not. Not that there weren't working class women who fought for women's rights and fought for change in the 19th century. There certainly were, but it is certainly much more the preserve of society ladies. But she went into the East End, didn't she? She kind of really went to where the women in absolute crisis were, and was kind of somebody who really tore apart some of those taboos and seeing these women as the lowest of the low. And you're saying that she was able to kind of put some kind of economic analysis on it. This isn't just sort of immorality. This is necessity.
Absolutely. She did go into the East End. She did work with the fledgling Salvation Army at the time, and she went all around the country as well. I mean, even though, I say she lived to an old age, into her 70s, but she was never, as far as I can tell, blessed with very good health. No. I think she struggled quite a lot with her own mental and physical health, but she still never spared herself. I mean, she would travel, all around the country doing little talks and group meetings, association meetings, just putting herself out there and tackling head on the voices who said, leave this alone. There's no problem here, or her argument around the Contagious Diseases Acts was why is this not applying to men? Why is this not applying to soldiers and sailors who are coming back to this country from abroad and bringing contagious disease with them? Obviously, why is it only applying to the women in the port towns and the garrisons around the British coast? Who are meeting men on their return. So she was just pointing out the gross inequality of all of this, and ultimately there was no answer to it. I mean, ultimately she won the day. Yeah, and she's rightly remembered as a kind of not just one of the people that prefigured the suffrage movement, which she comes slightly earlier, but also one of the kind of the key figures in the beginnings of British social reform in the 19th century.
Life is unpredictable, but preparing for the unexpected shouldn't be. Take ownership of your life planning with Policy Genius to help your loved ones have a financial safety net in case something happens to you. They offer life insurance policies starting at just $276 a year. for $1 million in coverage. Don't wait for life to make other plans. Protect your family today. Head to PolicyGenius.com. That's PolicyGenius.com.
I think that's effectively what she is, isn't she? She is a social reformer. And the where she campaigned to set the age of consent, I mean, she got it raised from 12 up to 13, and then from 13 to 16, and here we are in 2025 and it's still at 16, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is one of the things that Josephine Butler has left us.
Yeah.
With an age of consent at 16.
So a key figure in the history of things like child welfare and child protection. Well, what we would understand as child protection now.
Yes.
And so finally, in the trilogy, we have George Biddell Airy, whom again not a great many people have heard of, but perhaps the most influential figure of the three, maybe.
Absolutely. Do you know, that's a really interesting take on it, Nick. I didn't know, to my shame, I knew less about George Airy myself when I came to this. Grace, I knew a little about. Josephine, probably less about. George Airy, very, very little about. And I was walking through Alnwick, the town of Alnwick in Market Town in Northumberland, shortly after I'd completed the Josephine Butler manuscript, and there was a blue plaque on the wall in very near the town centre, actually, obviously within what would have been the old town wall, and it had George Airy, born here, and went on to be Astronomer Royal for nearly half a century, nearly half of the 19th century. And I thought, well, how on earth does a little lad who was born in 1801 in Alnwick, a little town in Northumberland, how on earth did that happen? And I thought, well, there's got to be a story there, and I started looking into it a bit more, and sure enough, it's an extraordinary story, I think, that shows us something about the Victorian morality at the time, and about the sort of thrilling developments of new technology and new equipment that was so important at the time. And it's again, I think George is probably a bit of a prickly character. He certainly rubbed up some people the wrong way, but he is arguably the template for the chief scientific advisor, not just astronomers, but the chief scientific advisors that we have today. And again, just an absolutely extraordinary man who started from, really unlikely beginnings. I mean, today, 200 years on, why not? If you come from a town in Northumberland, absolutely the world is your oyster. At the time, it really wasn't, and it was really remarkable what he achieved, and
what was his story? What was his story?
Well, he was born to a tax collector father who travelled around quite a lot, and they didn't really have two farthings to rub together. So at a very young age, George was sent to live for at least 6 months of the year with one of his mum's brothers, his uncle Arthur. And it was really his uncle Arthur in the south of England who had a shelf of books. And on that shelf of books, there were one or two about the stars. And that was, I think, the beginning of an interest in astronomy. And it was his uncle Arthur who had a wider social network of contacts, of writers and teachers and so on. And it was Arthur who got George an interview for Trinity College in Oxford, and right. Sure enough, George was admitted there, and he excelled at maths and made a career. He needed to get a job. He couldn't just sit around. studying. He needed to get a job because his prospective father-in-law needed to see an income. Before he proposed a thing that fascinated me about George. I think only the second time he met, he maybe the third, he proposed to this lady that he'd fallen madly in love with, and her father said, "Well, hold your horses. I need to see an income, and I need to understand what your prospects are." So George had to get a job, and he started getting a job at observatories and in astronomy, and it was there that he sort of made his name as a very competent manager of observatories, very diligent, excellent record keeping. And that was where he sort of made his name, and he was offered the position of I think he was the 7th Astronomer Royal, all men. I mean, it's only in 2025. It's only this year that I think an Astronomer Royal is a woman for the very first time. But obviously, in Victorian England, they were all men. But George was offered the position, and he stayed in it for very nearly 50 years. I think it was 46 years that he did it, and he died in Greenwich. Right. The grand old age. You know, he topped 90 years of age.
And was he? He died in Greenwich, and I know that he has a kind of a connection to the sort of like the standardisation of time, didn't he? So,
well, that's the key thing. That is the key thing. I mean, his single biggest achievement is probably designing and installing what was known and still is known. It's still there, actually. The Airy Transit Telescope, which was a more accurate telescope through the light that went through it and the lens quality and all the rest of it. It was designed and built as the most accurate telescope at Greenwich at the time, and he reset Greenwich Mean Time, so he shifted it to a more accurate position. Right. The key thing, as you know, that the Astronomers Royal did was to focus on star positions to aid navigators. That was really the key focus at the time. They were they were independent, but they were almost a branch of the Admiralty, really. Yeah. And that was their focus. And sure enough, that was George's focus. He got involved in many, many other things. As I say, he was almost a chief scientific advisor to the governments of the day. But his key achievement, I think, is setting Greenwich Mean Time as the standard for navigators all around the world. And that again, what an achievement for a lad born in Alnwick into nothing at all.
And by doing so, I mean the entirety of Britain's world power depended on its navy, its the Royal Navy and the Merchant Navy, and its maritime connections to its empire. So he was quite an important guy from that perspective.
You're invited to spend an evening on Fremont Avenue. For generations, this house has been home to soulful music, good food, and cutthroat card games. Saints and sinners, unexpected laughs and unspoken truths. Good times, hard times, and of course, family. Always family. So pull up a chair and join us at Fremont Avenue, a world premiere play only at Arena Stage. Now in performances. Tickets at arenastage.org.
It's homecoming season at HBCUs, when generations of alumni come together to celebrate Black culture and community. State Farm honors the strength of those communities and legacy, pride, and unstoppable energy of the HBCU family. That's why State Farm agents are committed to helping you choose the coverage you need so you can protect the things that matter most. And that's something to celebrate too. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
He was I mean, it was very much a time of empire, explosion of maritime activity. You know, people exploring, explosion of trade from north of England to south of England. You know, the coal fields, shipping their coal down to London by sea and by rail to power the growth of London. International trade going across the Channel and right across the oceans. I mean, it was a time when, you know, iron ships made it possible for ordinary men and women to cross the Atlantic. We were joined up to America for the very first time, and America accepted GMT as the standard for time. I mean, their own time is based on the meridian that George placed.
So
fantastic,
an incredible figure. So we must draw to a close in a moment, but while all the links to the 3 books will be in the podcast notes below. So anyone that's really interested in Grace, Josephine, or George can access them down below. What we always say on the podcast is, if you can purchase them from an independent book retailer, please do that, or directly from the publisher if you can't. Mark, it's been a real pleasure to have you on today. If you have future projects in mind, do come back, because we'd love to talk about Victorian figures or anybody else. It's always a kind of, it's been a real fascinating exploration today. I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you very much, Nick. I'm grateful to you. I'm a fan of your podcast, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. Okay, thanks, and all the best.
You're invited to spend an evening on Fremont Avenue. For generations, this house has been home to soulful music, good food, and cutthroat card games. Saints and sinners, unexpected laughs and unspoken truths. Good times, hard times, and of course, family. Always family. So pull up a chair and join us at Fremont Avenue, a world premiere play only at Arena Stage. Now in performances. Tickets at arenastage.org.
Life is unpredictable, but how you prepare for the unexpected shouldn't be. Take ownership of your life planning with Policy Genius to help your loved ones have a financial safety net in case something happens to you. Whether to cover debts and routine expenses, or even invest the money and earn interest over time. With Policy Genius, finding and buying life insurance is simple. You can compare quotes from top insurers and could find coverage that fits your needs and your budget. Plus, they offer life insurance policies starting at just $276 a year for $1 million in coverage. It's an easy way to feel good about and plan for the future. No wonder Policy Genius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. Don't wait for life to make other plans. Protect your family today. Head to PolicyGenius.com to compare top-rated life insurance policies, get your lowest quote, and make a smart move in under 10 minutes. That's PolicyGenius.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.